Jayne-Anne, you're chair of the board at Ozone API.
Yep.
Thanks for joining. Maybe you can just introduce yourself and also maybe, what interested you about Ozone when you first got involved with our board, a couple of years ago now?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Huw. So my background, I'm an accountant by background. Then I went into the asset management industry, set up Virgin Money in financial services. We acquired Northern Rock and became a bank, listed that and sold it. And at that point of sale, open banking in 2018 was brand new and exciting. And so with a bunch of people that had been friends and colleagues at Virgin Money, I set up a commercial business based on open banking called Snoop. And the idea was to put people in control of their data. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that as time goes on. And so as we sold Snoop to Vanquis Bank, I really wanted to stay part of that new and exciting future. And there you were. Growing business, exciting business, B2B rather than B2C. And I have to say for, founders out there, I think that's a really good business model. And so it felt like just the right time to use some of the experience that I'd grown up with through financial services and open banking to work with you and to, look at the next phase of open banking and regulation.
And first of all, thanks for joining us. I think it was serendipity at the time because, we were looking for someone to chair the board, and with your experience, it felt like a perfect fit. And it's been it's been a great journey for the past couple of years. Maybe in the discussion, let's start with the UK, because as you mentioned, kind of towards the back end of your career at Virgin Money was when open banking was starting to become a reality in the UK. In fact, we've just hit the 8-year anniversary of open banking in the UK. It's interesting. If I look at it, there's some really good milestones. I mean, we're seeing billions of API calls. We're seeing 16.5 million regular users. At the same time, it's sort of been treading water for a little while. There's a lot that hasn't changed. We've been stuck in a regulatory mindset for a while, but it feels like now things are really starting to move. The open banking was positioned as very central within the national payments vision, which was fantastic to see. We've got a new entity that's being set up for building a commercial scheme around open banking payments. The FCA are taking on accountability and are just about to hopefully announce the future entity, and then the foundations are being laid for smart data. So it feels like things are about to start moving again in a big way. But take it back to, I guess, the first days of open banking. You were the CEO of a large bank in the UK.
Yeah.
How did you view it? Was this a good thing? A threat? What did you think?
Well, it's interesting. So I absolutely saw it as a good thing, but let me explain why. So throughout my time at Virgin Money, there had been, and particularly post-financial crisis, there'd been a lot of talk about competition in the banking sector. And, the UK in particular, not very many banks. And as a consequence, with banks owning all of our data really as customers, the view was, is this some form of oligopoly? And how do we create more competition? And the regulators and the government, so, FCA now and PRA, as well as HMT, the Treasury, were thinking about how do we make that competition thrive so people get a better deal. And what they started with really was encouraging banks like Virgin Money and others to get out there and grow and really take on the competition. And although we all tried to do that, we discovered, not just Virgin Money, the industry, the sector, the regulators discovered it's actually really hard to break down that sort of dominance of the big banks. And the reason for that, in many ways, is that we as consumers don't like switching our bank accounts. It's painful, it's time consuming, it's boring. And actually, when you get down to the heart of it, the absolute reason that people said they didn't like switching their current accounts when I was involved was they were worried about losing their Sky Television subscription. It was, if this all takes a long time and it goes wrong, what happens? I won't be able to watch my favourite programmes anymore. And so it becomes quite a sort of visceral day-to-day thing that I feel personally. I don't want to take the risk to move from the banks. And so as a consequence, we do have more banks in the UK, but we're still not, challenging those very big ones that we've all grown up with. And, they continue to be dominant: Lloyds, Barclays, HSBC, etc., despite and I'm sure we'll talk about this, the incoming banks like Revolut and Monzo, those big banks are, the core of our banking sector. And so I think I'm right in saying, and I often give them the credit, that open banking, although it's a worldwide phenomena, really started with the thought process in the UK, which was, if we are to increase competition, if we are going to break the dominance of the big banks, how do we do that? And the thinking process was, well, hang on a second, who really does own the data? It's the data that is the most valuable thing. And, open banking started by the government, actually, rather than the regulators, saying, well, surely data belongs to the customer and the consumer. Shouldn't the consumer have access and ownership of their own data to be able to drive their own financial future, rather than the big banks sort of exploiting that data and driving it on their own behalf? And that was, I think, where the thought for open banking came from. And, I mean, you asked me, did I see it as an opportunity or a threat? Because of where I came from and where I was in that sort of ecosystem of not quite being able to break the big bank bubble, I was thrilled about it, and the new banks, I think, should be thrilled about it, because it gives you the opportunity to use some of that data that otherwise you can only acquire through encouraging people to switch. And as I've just said, that doesn't happen very often.
It's interesting. At the beginning, there was I think, a lot of talk about switching as one of the measures of success. And I think a lot of people have concluded, actually, that's probably not the right measure. It's about how these rails for secure consent-based data sharing are being used to power different things. If you look at the fastest growing banks around the world now, Revolut, you mentioned, Nubank, the Starlings and the Monzos, they're growing exceptionally well without necessarily being dependent on customers switching the account their salary goes into at the beginning. There's much more of a portfolio of how you manage your financial services now, rather than the traditional view of a primary bank. I remember in 2021 there was a very famous statement made by Anne Boden. I think it was in one of the Treasury Select Committees. Yeah. I think the question was really focused around switching and has open banking been a success? And she made the point, quite rightly actually, what customers want is better service rather than just necessarily data. It was picked up at the time as a statement that says open banking's broken, open banking's a flop. I think the numbers we see now suggest that's not the case. But it was sort of suggesting this isn't about switching. This is about enabling innovation on top. I know you've commented on that in the past. I mean, what's your view? Is this about just switching, or is this something much more?
No, much more than that. And, I can remember being at a lunch hosted by, I won't say who, but a CEO of a big bank around this time, as open banking was coming in and banks were being forced, in their view, to make data available for APIs and platforms to support open banking. And this particular CEO was absolutely livid about it. That's the first thing. And I can see them now at this lunch standing up and saying, we must fight this. We're all bankers. We have to fight it. We've spent a fortune acquiring customers. And what do we actually acquire? We acquire their data, and we must keep it to ourselves. And so, let's be really clear. It's only been 8 years since open banking started. And actually, the regulators and the government have had quite a fight on their hands to change that sort of view. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I think that the real power of open banking, to your point, Huw, is it doesn't require us to switch as customers. Yeah. Actually, we can get the benefit of both worlds. So you can have your, traditional, secure, safe banking platforms if you want it, with the big names and banks that are known to, be really solid. But at the same time, through your data with them, you can use it in a much more innovative way to either make sure that your finances are optimized or to use other platforms to do specific things that you want. And I think that is the real benefit. So I know Anne Boden, I think she's done a brilliant thing to set up Starling. I completely disagree with her around open banking being a failure. I think we're only at the beginning of what it can achieve, and I think it can achieve a huge amount by putting customers for the first time really, in control of the information about me that I should control for my benefit. Because for so long it's been, my data's been used by the big banks for their benefit and for their profitability. So it's an enormous switch, but it's a super important one in my view.
And you mentioned the challenge in the market dynamics at the time. I mean, I was privileged to be part of the leadership team at the open banking implementation entity. So we're seeing all of those dynamics firsthand. And the UK, I think, did create a blueprint in terms of how do you, the first market to take a very regulatory driven approach and create a very structured architecture and framework. And I think one of the things that kind of is an absolute, what this is delivering is, it's a set of pipes, it's a set of infrastructure, it's not the end proposition.
Yeah.
And you see that being adopted in different ways at different rates. So I think the areas where it had the greatest impact the most quickly, one was for businesses around how they can pull all of their information effectively into their accounting platforms and their invoicing platforms. The other's in the credit space. How you can get access to all of this data beyond just the traditional credit bureau data. I think there have been some great examples, but honestly, I think some of the biggest innovation is yet to come.
Yeah.
One of the big challenges, the big arguments from the banks was they were having to invest a lot of money in building the capability and the infrastructure, but there wasn't a commercial overlay that created a balanced ecosystem. We're just about to move into that phase in the payment space. So a new operating scheme's been created in the UK to run a commercial scheme for open banking payments so that the banks will get paid for exposing the right APIs. I get a couple of questions, really. How do you feel about that? And do you think that lays the foundations for a real acceleration in innovation and potentially even threaten some of the more traditional payment means?
Yes. I mean, I think that the way in which the traditional system, not just payment, can be threatened by open banking, if that's the right way of looking at it, is by giving customers better service, frankly. So, in the end, I always remember somebody saying to me years ago, the financial services and the banking system's about being able to save money, borrow money and move money around. And I don't think that'll ever change. The question is, how do we do that optimally, with the best price and knowing that you're not getting ripped off? And, the fact of the matter has been that over time, big banks have taken advantage of their customers because, they've been able to increase prices, reduce prices on savings, etc. Now, with this data being exposed, whether it's through payment systems or more broadly, as I say, it gives other commercial institutions the opportunity to look at that data and make sure customers are getting the best outcome, which I think is really important. The reason that I don't think it should sort of destroy the big banks is they're not stupid. They are also innovative. I remember Barclays years ago saying they're going to become really a tech company that did banking rather than a big bank. And you've seen all of the big banks really invest in digitisation and improvement of capability. And I think surely they're also using the capability of customer data with customer consent to be able to give their customers better outcomes. And so I think where the real opportunity and where the real benefit even now is the new innovators have got access now to data that's super valuable, which is pushing the banks to do new things, but they will do new things. They're not going to go obsolete, they will do new things. They'll give customers better deals. And as a consequence, I think everybody wins. And that's one of the reasons I think open banking's so great. I think, used properly, not seen as a threat, seen as a way of giving customers the best possible service. And by the way, we haven't talked about how AI might come into this yet. But giving customers the best possible service, I think, is what any successful business is going to look to do that. And that's the big banks and the new banks, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, the data points to actually the biggest users of open banking are typically the biggest banks.
Of course.
And we see that in most markets because they have the broad customer relationships and they can do more for their customers with that access. Just going back to your journey with Snoop. So you obviously saw an opportunity. It'd be great to hear a little more about kind of that vision. And did the ecosystem enable you to do what you really wanted as Snoop, or were there any barriers or challenges with what was available from an open banking perspective?
I mean, in some ways, we were a bit ahead of our time, I think. And Snoop is still owned by Vanquis Bank, still doing really well. I saw it I'm not involved anymore, but I saw it in the papers only 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. Highest savings rates, customer satisfaction very high. And so the thing that linked Virgin Money to Snoop was that at Virgin Money we had a really strong consumer ethos, which we called to make everyone better off. And the idea was that, customers came to Virgin Money and we couldn't always give them the best possible price. You couldn't compare everything and we'd always be, never knowingly undersold. But in the round and as a package, we would aim to give great customer service, really good value products across the range, etc. But we were limited by the products we had, if you see what I mean. And as a smaller bank, it was quite difficult to extend our product range. And so as a number of us moved out of Virgin Money, we were thinking, well, is there a way with new technology, new capability, without the constraints of a banking regulation, banking license, is there a way to make people better off in a different way, given our banking knowledge? And when open banking presented itself as, well, through APIs, with customer consent, we can see people's financial data, help them to see where their best products are, where they're most likely to be able to save based on their spending patterns, where, they might get a better mortgage rate or whatever, then why don't we do that so that we can show them how to save and really be better off across their entire financial life? And that's worked really, really well. I mean, the challenges along the way, to your point, Huw, are, it was really difficult to put those APIs in. They were pretty clunky to start with. We were one of the first to do that, I think. And so that, I presume, has continued to be enhanced as technology and regulation has moved on. But I do think that it's particularly powerful for giving customers a better deal, and that's what the regulators and the banks, the politicians always want. How do we look after the taxpayer? How do we look after the customer?
Yeah, I heard a great analogy from, in fact, one of the team just a couple of days ago, saying kind of the historic mindset of a financial institution was you kind of build big walls. It's a big vault.
Yeah.
Super secure, but everything's locked inside. And once you're invited inside, you can access what's in there, your money and the products. In this new world, it's about moving away from big walls and it's about putting in place bridges. The APIs are bridges so that the bank can embed their products and services and the ability to move money wherever their customers are, but also use those bridges to bring in more information so they can do more within their customers. Yeah. And it really landed with me, that walls versus bridges analogy. And I think it is a completely different mindset and a different business model.
Well, and so I like the analogy. I've not heard it before. Where, you see, the reason that I think walls are important is, maybe I'm old-fashioned and I know that people think about their data slightly differently than I do, but I do think it's quite important that we have secure banking data
100%.
And secure banks.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? I don't want to be banking with anybody where I think that, people that I don't want can see my data, obviously, or access my accounts. One of the other brilliant things about open banking is that your data does stay with the bank. So it's a sort of read-only access, if you like. The data's not moved, but it's accessed so that it can be used as a sort of facilitator, but you can still be confident that that data's safe. And so, again, as I say, I think that's a win-win, really, that you've got the security of the big platform, but the nimbleness of the access that this provides.